The cold marble was a living thing beneath his knees. Rain, fine as mist, clung to the shoulders of his tailored black suit, each droplet a tiny, perfect sphere of grief. Ryosuke Tanaka did not feel the dampness seeping through the expensive wool. He felt only the engraved name on the headstone, Haru Tanaka.
Bellevue de sang.
A lie carved in granite. There had been no love in it, only failure. He held the photograph, its edges softened from the years of being held. A 7-year-old boy with his father's serious eyes and his mother's fleeting smile, frozen in a moment of impossible joy at a summer festival, a paper lantern held aloft in his small hands. Ryosuke had seen the coffin. He had watched them lower the small, polished box into the earth. He had thrown the first handful of dirt himself, the sound of it hitting the wood a final, percussive end to his world. Shame was a cold fire in his gut, a constant companion. He had failed to protect him. This ritual, this visit, was a penance he paid in silence. The crunch of gravel broke the sanctity of his solitude. He did not look up. No one in his organization would dare approach him here. This place was his alone. The footsteps were light, hesitant, yet deliberate. A rival, then. An assassin with a profound lack of respect. He remained kneeling, his body a study in stillness, but every muscle was coiled. His hand, resting on his knee, was inches from the weapon holstered beneath his jacket. Mr. Tanaka? The voice was female, soft, with an American accent that was jarringly out of place in the quiet reverence of the Aoyama cemetery. He slowly lifted his head. She stood a respectful distance away, a young black woman who could not have been more than 20. She was dressed in the crisp, plain uniform of a service worker, black trousers, a pressed white shirt, and a simple red vest over it. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and her eyes, wide and dark, held a nervous energy that warred with a surprising amount of resolve. She looked like she belonged behind the counter of a coffee shop, not here, in the private graveyard of the head of the Kudo-kai clan. "You are trespassing," Ryosuke said. His voice was low, rough from disuse, the sound of stones grinding together. She swallowed, her throat moving visibly. She held her hands clasped in front of her, a gesture of placation. "I work at the diner, just outside the gates. I saw you come in. I recognize you from the news." He did not respond. His gaze was dismissive, a silent command for her to leave. He wanted to return to the ghost of his son. But she did not move. Instead, she took a small, bracing breath. "I know this is going to sound impossible. And I know you have no reason to believe me." She paused, her eyes flickering down to the photograph in his hand, then back to his face. "But your son,
Hazu.
He's still alive." The world, which had been muted and gray, snapped into sharp, painful focus. The rain felt colder. The scent of wet earth and chrysanthemums was suddenly suffocating. He stared at her, his mind a sudden, violent blank. It was a cruel trick. A psychological attack from the Hashimoto clan, his most persistent rivals. They had found his one vulnerability and were twisting the knife. "What did you say?" The question was lethal, each word honed to a razor's edge. The woman, Naomi, flinched but held her ground. "Your son is alive," she repeated, her voice clearer now, firmer. "He's with me. At my apartment. With my mother." Ryosuke's knuckles were white where he gripped the photograph. He had seen the body. A small, broken thing, mangled in the wreckage of the car. The closed casket had been a mercy, they said. He had demanded to see. And he had seen. He had traced the line of his son's jaw, cold and still beneath his trembling fingers. "You are lying," he breathed. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. No, her gaze was unwavering. "The boy in that coffin was not your son. It was a lie. I don't know why or who did it, but I know Haru. He's been with us for almost a year. He showed up on our doorstep, lost and unable to speak. My mother took him in. He had a severe concussion. It took him months to remember his own name." Every word was a hammer blow against the foundation of his grief. A grief that had become his identity, the engine of his cold, calculated rage. To have it challenged, to have a sliver of impossible hope inserted into the cracks, was an agony worse than the loss itself. "He has a small scar," she said, her voice dropping, becoming more intimate, more certain. "Right behind his left ear. Shaped like a tiny crescent moon. From falling out of a tree." Ryosuke's breath hitched. No one knew about that scar. It was a secret between a father and a son, a story told with a clumsy bandage, and a promise not to tell his mother how high he had actually climbed. It was not in any report. Not in any file. He looked down at the photograph in his hand, at the smiling face of the boy he had buried. And the photograph slipped from his numb fingers, landing face down in the damp gravel. That was the moment everything changed. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the gentle hiss of the rain. Naomi stood frozen, watching the man before her. His stillness was more terrifying than any outburst could have been. He did not move to pick up the fallen picture. He simply stared at the spot where it lay, as if it were the body of some freshly killed thing. Slowly, deliberately, he rose to his feet. He was taller than she had expected, his frame lean but powerful beneath the impeccable suit. The fabric, she noted with a detached part of her brain, was a charcoal so dark it was almost black, and it did not wrinkle or sag despite the damp. He moved like the world was built to accommodate him, the air parting before he even stepped forward. He closed the distance between them in 2 silent strides. Naomi's survival instinct screamed at her to run, to flee back to the mundane safety of the diner with its scent of stale coffee and fried food. But she was rooted to the spot, held captive by the sheer intensity of his gaze. His eyes were not black, she realized, but a deep, dark brown, so profound they seemed to absorb the light around them. They were ancient eyes, filled with a weariness that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with loss. "Where?" he asked. The single word was a command, not a question. "My apartment," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "In Shinjuku." He said nothing more. He simply turned and walked toward the cemetery gates. A long, black car, as sleek and silent as a panther, pulled away from the curb the moment he emerged. The rear door opened without a sound. He stopped beside it and looked back at her. It was not an invitation. It was an expectation. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was the point of no return. She could turn and run, disappear into the city, hope he never found her. But the image of Haru, his small face finally breaking into a real smile just last week, flashed in her mind. He deserved his father. And this man, this dangerous, broken man, deserved the truth.
She had started this.
She had to see it through. With a deep breath that did little to calm her shaking nerves, Naomi walked toward the car. The interior was cool and smelled of expensive leather and something else, a faint, clean scent like cedarwood and smoke. She slid onto the plush seat, and the door closed with a solid, final thud, sealing her inside with him, sealing her away from the world she knew. The car moved off, gliding through the Tokyo streets with an unnerving smoothness. The city lights blurred into long streaks of neon and white. Beside her, Ryosuke was a monolith of silence. He did not look at her. He stared straight ahead, his profile carved from stone, his hands resting on his knees. She noticed the intricate lines of a tattoo peeking from beneath the starched white cuff of his shirt, a flash of black and gray ink depicting the scales of a dragon. She told herself it was survival instinct that made her study him. The way his jaw was clenched so tight a muscle jumped near his temple. The way his stillness was not relaxed, but predatory, like a tiger waiting for the precise moment to strike. She was in a cage with a dangerous animal, and she had just told it that the thing it mourned most might not be dead after all. Hope, she realized, could be a crueler weapon than any knife. "If you are lying to me," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of an oath, "the consequences will be absolute." "I'm not lying," she said, and was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "When we get there, you'll see." He finally turned his head, and his eyes met hers. For the first time, she saw past the cold authority. She saw a flicker of raw, desperate agony. The shame of a man who had failed in his most sacred duty, and the terrifying, fragile hope of a man who was being offered an impossible redemption. The penthouse was a sterile expanse of glass, steel, and white marble that overlooked the glittering sprawl of the city. It felt less like a home and more like a fortress in the sky. Ryosuke had not taken her to her apartment. He had brought her here, to his territory. Two of his men, silent and imposing in identical black suits, had escorted her from the car. They moved with an unsettling economy of motion, their eyes constantly scanning, missing nothing. Naomi stood in the center of the vast living room, feeling small and terribly exposed under the recessed lighting. Ryosuke stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to her, looking down at the city he so clearly commanded. "Tell me everything," he ordered, his voice echoing slightly in the sparsely furnished room. From the beginning, Naomi recounted the story, her voice even despite the tremor in her hands. She told him about the night nearly a year ago when her mother had found the little boy huddled in the stairwell of their apartment building, shivering, with a vacant look in his eyes. He had no memory, not even his name. They had taken him to a doctor, who diagnosed a severe concussion and amnesia. They reported him to the police as a lost child, but no one ever came looking. No missing person reports matched his description. "We called him River," she said softly, "because we found him after a storm. He was quiet for months. He wouldn't speak, just hum. A little tune. Over and over, she hummed the simple, 5-note melody, a childish, repetitive tune she had heard 1,000 times. Ryosuke's shoulders stiffened. It was a lullaby his wife used to sing to Haru, a song only the three of them knew. He started talking again about 6 months ago, Naomi continued. Little things at first. His name. Hazu. He remembered a playground with a dragon slide. He remembered your face. He drew a picture of you. She reached into the pocket of her trousers and pulled out a folded, slightly crumpled piece of paper. It was a child's drawing, rendered in bright crayon. A stick figure of a man in a black suit, with impossibly broad shoulders and scribbled black hair, holding the hand of a smaller stick figure. Above them, a lopsided yellow sun smiled down. She held it out to him. He did not turn around. "Leave it on the table," he commanded. She placed it carefully on the polished surface of a low glass table. The silence stretched, thick with tension. She had given him the scar, the lullaby, the drawing. She had no more proof to offer. The rest was waiting in a small apartment 2 wards over, sleeping in the bed that used to be hers. "My mother," Naomi said, the words tight in her throat. "Is she safe?" "My men are outside your building," he replied, his tone clipped and impersonal. "No one will get in. Or out." The implication was clear. Her mother and the boy were protected, but they were also prisoners. Suddenly, his phone vibrated, a low buzz against the glass table where he'd set it. He picked it up, his eyes scanning the screen. The muscle in his jaw jumped again. He turned from the window, and for the first time since they had arrived, he looked directly at her. The cold calculation was back, but it was overlaid with something new. A sliver of uncertainty. "There was an attempted breach at your apartment complex 10 minutes ago," he said. 2 men. They were intercepted. Naomi's blood ran cold.
What?
Who were they? "They will not be answering any questions," he said, and the finality in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. "But their affiliations are clear. They belong to the Hashimoto clan." That was when she understood. This was not just a tragic accident or a simple case of a lost child. Haru had been deliberately taken, his death faked. Someone powerful had stolen him, hidden him, and now they were coming back to retrieve their asset. And she and her mother had been sheltering the most valuable and most dangerous secret in the Tokyo underworld. Ryosuke crossed the room, his movements fluid and precise. He stopped in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He was searching her face, his dark eyes stripping away her defenses, looking for any hint of deception. "You have brought a war to my doorstep," he said, his voice a low growl. "I brought you your son," she countered, lifting her chin. Her fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but her resolve was hardening into steel. She had done the right thing. She would not let him intimidate her into regretting it. A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps even respect, passed through his eyes. He held her gaze for a long moment, a silent battle of wills fought in the space of a few inches. The air between them was charged, electric. She was acutely aware of a scent, the cedar and smoke, and the sheer physical presence of him. He was a man who lived in a world of violence and death, and yet, in that moment, all he was focused on was her. That is when she made the mistake of looking down at his hands. They were elegant, with long fingers, but his knuckles were scarred, and the back of his right hand bore a faint, pale line where it had been broken and healed imperfectly. These were not the hands of a businessman. They were the hands of a soldier, a king who fought his own battles. He saw where she was looking. He did not move to hide them. "I am going to your apartment," he said, the decision made. "You will come with me. You will show me my son." He paused, his voice dropping even lower. "And if this is some elaborate trap, pray for a swift ending." The choice to stay had been made for her the moment she got into his car. But now, a new choice presented itself. She could be his prisoner, or she could be his ally. She could be a victim of this war, or she could help him end it. "Let's go," she said, her voice firm. "He'll be waking up soon. He always asks for honey toast for breakfast." It was a small, domestic detail, a piece of the ordinary world she was trying to anchor herself to. But to Ryosuke, it was another crack in the wall of his grief. Another piece of evidence that the impossible might just be true. For the first time, a shadow of emotion other than cold fury crossed his face. It was a raw, painful vulnerability. The wound of a father who had missed a year of breakfasts. The ride to her apartment was a blur of tension. Ryosuke sat beside her, a silent, brooding presence, while 2 cars filled with his men trailed them and 2 more scouted the road ahead. Naomi's building, a modest, aging structure in a quiet residential corner of Shinjuku, looked like a war zone. Black cars lined the street. Men in dark suits stood at every entrance, their posture rigid, their eyes constantly moving. Her neighbors were peering from behind their curtains, their faces a mixture of fear and curiosity. Naomi led the way up the narrow stairs, her keys shaking in her hand. Ryosuke was right behind her, so close she could feel his body heat. He moved with a predatory grace that was completely at odds with the humble surroundings. He placed a hand on the small of her back as she fumbled with the lock. It was not a comforting gesture. It was a claim, a physical reminder that she was under his absolute control. The touch was brief, but it sent a jolt through her, a current of heat and danger. The door swung open into the tiny apartment she shared with her mother. It smelled of lemon cleaner and old books. Her mother, a woman with kind eyes and a spine of steel, was sitting on their worn sofa, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. She looked up, her expression calm, though Naomi could see the fear she was trying to hide. 2 of Ryosuke's men stood like statues against the far wall. And there, sitting at their small kitchen table, a half-eaten piece of toast in his hand, was a little boy with serious, dark eyes. He looked up as they entered. His eyes widened slightly as they landed on Ryosuke. He did not look scared. He looked confused, as if trying to place a face from a half-remembered dream. He had Ryosuke's jawline, the same proud set of his shoulders, even in a small frame. And just behind his left ear, peeking out from his black hair, was a tiny, crescent-shaped scar. Ryosuke stopped dead in the doorway. All the air seemed to leave the room. The cold, lethal clan boss vanished, and in his place was just a man. A father staring at a miracle. He took a hesitant step forward, his movements suddenly clumsy, uncertain. "Haru," he breathed. The name was a fragile thing, full of pain and disbelief. The boy tilted his head. He looked from Ryosuke to Naomi, then back again. A flicker of recognition sparked in his eyes. "Papa," he whispered, the word tentative, questioning. That single word shattered the last of Ryosuke's composure. He sank to his knees, his expensive suit crumpling on the worn linoleum floor. He held out a trembling hand, not daring to get any closer, as if the boy were a mirage that might vanish if he moved too quickly. Naomi felt a lump form in her throat. She looked at her mother, who gave her a small, reassuring nod. They had done this. They had brought this broken family back together. But the feeling of triumph was short-lived. This was not an ending. It was a rehook, a raising of the stakes to a level she could never have imagined. The boy was real. The danger was real. And the war she had walked into was just beginning. The tender reunion was cut short by the sharp vibration of Ryosuke's phone. He ignored it. His entire world had shrunk to the small boy who was now taking a hesitant step toward him. But the phone buzzed again, insistent. One of his men stepped forward and murmured something in his ear. Ryosuke's head snapped up, the brief moment of paternal vulnerability vanishing as if it had never been. The ice-cold mask of the clan leader slammed back into place. He rose to his feet in one fluid motion. "They're making a move," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He looked at Naomi, his eyes boring into hers. "The Hashimoto clan. They know we're here. They're closing the street." Panic, cold and sharp, seized Naomi. "We have to get him out of here." "They are not here for him," Ryosuke said, a chilling certainty in his tone. He pulled out his phone and looked at the screen. His face went rigid. He turned the phone and showed it to her. It was a picture, sent from an unknown number. A live photo of her mother, taken seconds ago through the scope of a sniper rifle, a red laser, hovering directly over her heart. The message beneath it was simple. A son for a son. Send the woman out. They wanted her, not the boy. Her. The one who had uncovered their secret. The one who had brought Ryosuke to their prize. She was the loose end. The moment she saw that red, something inside Naomi shifted. The line between right and wrong, between survival and sacrifice, blurred into a single, sharp point of focus.
Hazel.
She looked at the boy, who was now clinging to his father's leg, his small face buried in the fabric of his trousers. She had brought this danger to him, to her mother. She had to fix it. "Use me as a distraction," she said, her voice low and urgent. Ryosuke stared at her, his expression unreadable. "No. They want me," she insisted. "Let them think they're getting me. While they're focused on the exchange, you get Haru and my mother out through the back." "I do not sacrifice my people," he said, the words an iron law. "I'm not your people," she shot back. "I'm a waitress who got in over her head. But I am the reason they're here. This is my responsibility." She was crossing a line, stepping into his world of strategy and violence, and she did not hesitate. Before he could argue, a bullet shattered the window above the sink, showering the kitchen in glass. One of Ryosuke's men shoved her and her mother to the floor, shielding them with his own body. The quiet apartment had become a cage, and the hunters were circling. This was the moment one of them almost lost the other. Ryosuke moved with a speed that was terrifying. He drew his weapon, a sleek black pistol, and issued a string of calm, precise orders to his men in Japanese. He was no longer a father. He was a general on a battlefield. He pulled Naomi to her feet, his grip like steel on her arm. "Stay behind me," he commanded. Another shot rang out, this one hitting the wall near the door. They were being pinned down.
Trapped.
Naomi's mind raced. The back exit led to a narrow, enclosed alley. A perfect kill box. They would be slaughtered.
But there was another way.
A way only she knew. "The roof," she gasped, pointing upward. "There's a fire escape that connects to the next building over. It's old, but it's there." Ryosuke's eyes narrowed, processing the new information. He gave a sharp nod. He barked another order. Two of his men created a wall of suppressive fire toward the front windows, while the third grabbed Haru and her mother, pulling them toward the back of the apartment. Ryosuke kept Naomi behind him, his body a shield, as they moved. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and plaster dust. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. In the chaos, as they scrambled for the rooftop access ladder, their hands brushed. His skin was warm, steady. A strange anchor in the storm of violence. The tension confession came in the frantic, breathless moments on the rooftop, with the sounds of gunfire echoing from the street below. They were crouched behind a ventilation unit, the city lights a cold, indifferent backdrop. "I told myself bringing you here was just about doing the right thing," she said, her voice ragged. "About getting a boy back to his father." He was scanning the rooftops, his gun held ready, but his attention was on her. "I was lying to myself," she admitted, the words tasting like metal. "The moment I saw you in that graveyard, I knew staying away wasn't an option. Not for me." He looked at her then, the noise of the city and the battle below fading into a dull roar. His eyes were dark, intense, holding a dangerous honesty. "Fear is a rational response to my world." "Naomi," he said her name, and it sounded different from his lips. Not a label, but a designation. Something owned. "It is not what I see in your eyes." He didn't say what he saw instead. He didn't have to. In the shared danger, in the space between bullets, something had been forged between them. It was not love. It was something more primal. A recognition. A claim. They made it across to the next building, down another fire escape, and into the back of a waiting armored car. As they sped away, leaving the sounds of sirens behind, Naomi looked back at her apartment building. Her old life was gone. It had burned away in a hail of gunfire. She had lied. She had run. She had become an accessory to whatever violence Ryosuke deemed necessary. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. And she did not regret it. The final confrontation was surgical. Ryosuke did not wage war with brute force. He wielded it like a scalpel. Using information his men had extracted from one of the captured Hashimoto shooters, he located their base of operations, a discreet import-export warehouse down by the Tokyo docks. He had forbidden her from coming. She had refused to listen. "They targeted my mother. They put a price on my head. This is my fight, too," she had argued, her voice shaking with adrenaline and rage. "And I know that warehouse. I used to temp there in the office. I know the layout." He had studied her for a long, silent minute, his face an unreadable mask. Then he had simply nodded and handed her a lightweight Kevlar vest. The silent gesture was a greater admission than any words could have been. He was accepting her into his world. She was not a passive observer in the climax. Her knowledge was the key. She guided his team through the labyrinthine corridors of the warehouse, bypassing security patrols, leading them directly to the central office where the Hashimoto boss was coordinating his doomed assault. When the doors burst open, it was Naomi who moved first. While Ryosuke's men engaged the guards in a flurry of disciplined, lethal action, she saw the Hashimoto boss reaching for a panic button under his desk. Without thinking, she grabbed a heavy crystal paperweight from a nearby shelf and threw it with all her might. It struck his hand, shattering with a sharp crack, and he howled in pain. She had acted. She had changed the outcome. Ryosuke was a shadow in the ensuing chaos, a blur of motion ending in brutal finality. When the silence fell, thick and heavy with the scent of blood, he stood over his defeated rival. There was no triumph in his eyes, only a cold, weary finality. A cost had been paid. One of his most trusted men lay dead in the corridor, a price for this victory. Nothing in this world was free. He walked over to Naomi, who was standing by the desk, her chest heaving, the adrenaline slowly beginning to recede, leaving a profound tremor in its wake. He gently took her by the shoulders, his grip firm, grounding. He scanned her for injuries, his dark eyes missing nothing. "It is finished," he said. He did not thank her. He did not praise her. Instead, he made his acknowledgement of what she was to him, a statement that was no longer deniable, no longer hidden. "Haru needs a mother," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "He chose you. I will not dispute his judgment. It was not a proposal. It was a fact. A declaration of her place in his world, in his life. He was claiming her, her loyalty, her future, right here in a room filled with death." The final image was not one of passion, but of a fragile, hard-won peace. Weeks later, in the sterile perfection of the penthouse, Naomi sat on a plush white rug, helping Haru build a towering castle out of wooden blocks. The boy was laughing, a sound that was finally free and easy, a sound that was beginning to fill the empty spaces of the apartment. Ryosuke stood in the doorway, watching them. He was not wearing a suit, but a simple black shirt and trousers, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing the intricate artwork of his tattoos. He was still a dangerous man. The city outside was still a lethal chessboard, and he was still its king. But in here, in the quiet glow of the lamp, he was just a father. Her presence had not softened him, but it had given him something to protect beyond territory and power. It had given him a home. She felt his gaze and looked up, meeting his eyes across the room. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with everything they had survived, every line they had crossed. He gave her a barely perceptible nod, a sign of respect, of acknowledgement, a promise. Naomi did not smile. She simply held his gaze, her own expression clear and steady. She had made her choice in a graveyard, confirmed it in a hail of gunfire, and sealed it in a room full of blood. This was her life now. She turned back to the boy beside her and placed another block on the teetering castle. She was exactly where she was supposed to be,